as long as we're talking majority report, as long as we're talking electoral politics, including the Electoral College, I thought I'd bring up an interesting hypothetical. Would we be supporting democracy so hard if it didn't favor us? We're talking about, for example, regularly on this channel, getting rid of gerrymandering. But would we be preaching that if gerrymandering was the only thing that was keeping these anti-trans psychos from attacking trans people, or attacking gay people, or black people, or all Americans, the things we care about? Would we be supporting democracy if gerrymandering and the Electoral College was the only thing that was stopping big businesses from getting huge tax breaks? Obviously, it's the opposite. The opposite right now. But I ask that question because understanding, if you honestly search your feelings about that, it will help you understand how you have to address the folks who are very much against democracy, are very much against the people's will being done. You see a lot of these MAGA folks talking about how they support authoritarian governments, and how we need this system where a very few of us have votes. If you're in a rural place, have votes that are worth more than very many of us. Because in their mind, first they decide they're right about their views, and then whatever system gets their views made into law is right. We need to start separating that. And that also means we need to have the courage to ourselves stand up for the principle of the way things are decided. And it's easier to do that. It's easier to do that now. Now when we happen to be in the right. Our views and a fair system line up. But it won't always be that simple. It truly won't. One day, if we win, if we survive as a country, one day it's going to be lefties versus the new conservatives, who will most likely be called Democrats, as we do yet another name switch. And it might be that we hold views that we believe are right but are not popular. That's what I want to talk about. We got a short from the Majority Report to look into that a little bit.
Had every reason to be confident in democracy in the 1980s because, the democratic process was working for them. It was electing Republicans by overwhelming margin. And what has happened now, in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, the Democratic candidate has won the popular vote. If it wasn't for Senate malapportionment, Republicans wouldn't have controlled the United States Senate since the late 1990s. So the Republican Party right now knows it can't win through the democratic process. It has no reason to be confident in its own ability to pull together a political majority. And when you have a political movement that knows that it cannot win through the democratic process, that party basically has 2 choices. Either it can change its views and try to, say something popular and win that way, or it can say, we're going to look for ways to bypass the democratic system. And, the easiest way to bypass the democratic system in the United States is the Supreme Court. Republicans had every reason to be confident in democracy in the 1980s because,
Here's a somewhat rare thing. I disagree with that guess. There's three options. Go over the options that the guest said. Number one, change your views. Number two, go outside of democracy. What do you think the third option is? I'm going to ask you there. What do you think the third option is? It's what I so frequently ask you to do, and ask and try to practice here amongst friends. Sway people. Bring other people to your side. Make your ideas popular. Convince people. That is what you can do. So, knowing what you know from that video and having thought about it from an empathetic perspective, their perspective, the other side's, think about the kind of arguments you would make to yourself if you found yourself in a position where your views on how things ought to be were not reflected by the voters. I think if you sit down and you're honest with yourself, you will arrive at the conclusion that even if the voters end up choosing wrong, if you truly do believe in the United States of America, then you fundamentally believe that the people have a right to decide for themselves how they ought to live, the laws we live under. That it should be what the most of us agree on, and we leave the door open to change those laws, those ways of existing, if we find that they are insufficient. Think about how you would talk to yourself and talk to Republicans that way. Because right now, they are choosing the worst of those three paths. Or in this case, as that guest was stating it, two paths. Either change their views or change the way things are decided. The Republicans right now are relying on the Supreme Court to force their views on others. And you know what? This is going to hurt to hear. Lefties did that in the past. Lefties didn't set the precedent for that, but we adopted that technique at one point. First, yes, the Supreme Court was basically designed by the sort of people that knew their views would not be popular. But at one point, when interracial marriage wasn't terribly popular in the United States, when black folks being free wasn't terribly popular in the United States, when Jim Crow laws were popular, lefties relied on the Supreme Court to force through decency. And then, living under those conditions turned out to be a very popular thing, and they gained in popularity. I'm not saying it was even wrong then. We used the tools we had, but we need to learn from these things, and we need to develop better ways of just getting things done. It can't always be a big fight. Yes, there will always be people with terrible ideas, sure. But the number one way we are going to be able to push forward, the number one way we're going to be able to build stuff together, is by both sides. God help me, I can't believe I'm saying that, but by both sides focusing more on swaying each other. And yes, taking the teeth out of the Supreme Court. I think long term, that is something we should be focused on. But in the short term, it's gonna make our lives much easier if we are better at swaying people who right now, frankly, do not believe in democracy, do not believe that the way we live should be decided by consensus. So think about how you would have convinced yourself that that is the way we should be conducting ourselves, that we should not be relying on 9 elite robed individuals to decide how we're going to live our lives, and then address them that way. Address those people that you are going to be disagreeing with as though you were talking to yourself in another era.